Hey everybody, Coach Toolshed here, and in today's video I'd like to bring you my review for Remnant from the Ashes. Now, as with all my reviews, you can rest assured that I have taken the time to fully beat the game, and in the case of Remnant from the Ashes, I have actually got the Platinum Trophy for the game, which means I have done everything that the game had asked me to do 100%. I've beaten the game multiple times with multiple characters, and I'd like to bring you my review today. This is a game that actually kind of flew under the radar last year, didn't get a whole lot of publicity or fanfare, but still managed to be a bit of a sleeper hit, ended up selling over 1 million copies. The developer of the game is Gunfire Games, and if that sounds familiar, you might know them best from the Darksiders games. They are the developers for that series. Now, right off the bat, before we get too deep into the review, I should say my feelings on this game overall are a bit of a mixed bag, because while I do have a lot of good things to say about the game, and I did have a lot of fun playing it both in offline mode playing solo and in co-op mode playing with my friends, and even in some public sessions where I met some people and we played through a few areas, had some fun playing with strangers as well. It's actually a pretty fun game. There's a lot of interesting things that it does. It makes some decisions that I haven't really seen too many third-person action games take. I had some fun playing it. However, there are some severe technical issues that we have to get into later on in the review, and there's certainly some warts. The game is not perfect. It is not a AAA budget title. This is a AA type of game, and that is readily apparent right off the bat, but the price tag, it also reflects that. This is not a $60 game. It was a $40 game, and you can even pick up the game right now on Game Pass if you're a subscriber to that and play the game basically risk-free. But getting that out of the way, let's just dive right into the meat of the review. Now, what is this game? What is Remnant from the Ashes? Now, some people you'll see have written it off basically just summarizing it as Dark Souls with guns. And while it does borrow some of the gameplay structure from Dark Souls, the game is challenging. You're going to go through and fight many different bosses. The overall structure of the game and what you're actually going to be doing and how the game is presented to you is very different, and it actually has some very unique and different ideas that, like I said, you just don't see in other games of this genre. So what do you actually do in the game? Well, after you create your character and sit through a brief tutorial area, you will then be dumped into the main hub of the game, and this is where you'll find, the people that will upgrade your weapons and your armor. They'll find a vendor there that will sell you mods that you unlock after beating certain bosses. You'll find people there that will sell you restorative items. There's not really too much going on. There's a little bit of story to this game. We'll get into it in a little bit, but it's not really the main focus of the game. It's really more lore building than actually telling you a very detailed story. The story is coherent enough. It makes sense. It's just not really all that great or all that important to the overall scheme of the game. So what do you actually do once you get into the world? Well, you'll teleport into your first world, which is Earth. And unfortunately, one of the problems with the game is the starting area is by far the blandest, most boring looking area of the entire game. I don't really know why they did that. The later areas look a lot better, a lot more vibrant, a lot more color going on, more interesting enemies and whatnot. There's just not too much going on in the beginning area. There's one little problem with the game. However, what will happen is every area in the game is procedurally generated. There's different biomes that you will visit throughout the game. There's 4 in the game right now that I'm aware of. They have said that they're going to be adding different biomes. They've already added a few different bosses and zones, whatnot, but I don't think they've added any full biomes to the game yet. But the game is getting patched in with other content as we go along because, like I said, the game has actually done pretty well for the developer. However, so what's going to happen is every area is procedurally generated, and you'll go into a zone. There'll be a couple different branches you can go into off of each main zone. One of these will be the main path quest that you're going to be on to sort of progress through the world, and the other one will be an optional area that you can go and you might find a boss, you might find an NPC with a unique item, you might find just a bunch of enemies with a item stowed away somewhere in that zone on your way to another alternate area. There's a lot of different branching paths no matter which way you go through the game. Now, one of the interesting things and why the game is so replayable is no matter what you do, on your first playthrough, you probably will only see about 40 to 45% of the bosses in the game. You'll have to play through a second time to see them all, and even some people, because it's all totally randomized, you might go 3-4 times through the game and still see bosses that you haven't seen before. And that is one of the interesting things that the game does. It definitely adds some unique aspects to the game. People you know that you play with who might have different mods or different weapons, you'd be like, where'd you get that? And be, oh, off this boss or that boss, and you may have never even seen it. So it definitely offers a lot of replay value that many games of this type don't really offer, because there's so many different avenues and so many branching areas you can go off to because of the procedural generation. Now, while there are certain story beats that you will go through every time, the interesting thing that this game does is that it gives you the option to actually make some decisions, which most procedurally generated games don't do at all. You just kind of, okay, here's the world, progress through it, here's the boss, yada yada. In this game, there's actually different cutscenes that you're going to have to make decisions on. You can fight certain enemies and certain bosses that will give you items, which will allow you to skip entire areas altogether. You will be able to give, there's at one point where you'll have a certain item and you'll have to choose. If you want to go down this road, you'll fight this set of bosses. You go down this road, you'll fight a different set of bosses. It's very different. You don't usually see that very often with procedural generation. So the fact that you have these different story choices you can make that will lead you to different items or different boss weapons or different mods, and the fact that there's so many different bosses that you simply won't see on one single playthrough. I believe the developer said it will take the average person 2.5 playthroughs to see all the bosses, and like I mentioned, through the randomness of it all, you might play through the game a couple times and not see everything either. They have since launched added something that wasn't there originally. It's called Adventure Mode, and that is basically where you can just play individual biomes from the start and just keep re-rolling them. So if there's a specific boss that maybe drops a mod that you want for your character, but you've been unlucky, you haven't been able to roll that boss through your normal playthrough, you can sort of go into Adventure Mode and acquire that. And that is a way that the developers have done, because that was one of the major issues that people had. They'd see their friends or someone else online, they're like, hey, where did you get that skill? Where did you get that weapon or whatnot? And people would be like, oh, I got it off this boss. And you could play through the game for theoretically 50, 70 hours and maybe not get that boss. So they added this adventure mode, which is a nice touch. It gives you the option of getting through the game a lot quicker and maybe securing that item that you particularly want. Because one of the other interesting things this game does is without a doubt, it is one of the most customizable games I've played in terms of being able to build out your character. And they did so somehow with not really that many different skills. There's about 30 different skills in the game. There's not a ton of different mods. There's not a ton of different weapons, although there is a decent amount of long gun variety. There's not a ton of different armor sets. However, everything that they added to the game, once you max everything out, it's powerful enough where you can build out your character in any way you want. And there's a ton of different variety. You can make sort of a healer class character, believe it or not, in a shooter game like this. You can make a melee-based character if you want. I wouldn't recommend it. It's certainly a game that is better focused on guns, but you can do that if you want. You can make a magic-based character. Again, something weird in a game that is centered around basically being a third-person shooter, but you can make a character that is just devastating with magic attacks and go about that way. And actually, that's sort of the way I did it, and normally I would not go down that sort of path with a character in a game like this, but it was powerful enough, and I said, you want to know what? This is actually pretty fun, and you can have so many different options, because every weapon you can equip a mod to. And the mods, or like I said, you can get those dropped off individual bosses. Now, some are much better than others, and some are only situational. You can think on the fly, say, okay, this boss is giving me an issue with this. What if I put, say, for example, there's one where you can put out a decoy, and it will draw aggro to it for a few seconds, not a ton of time, but enough time for you to maybe heal up and get a few lucky shots. And there's other attacks that do damage over time that can be very powerful if you build your character in that way. Or, conversely, you can put all of your points into just being the best gunslinger around. You can put a ton of points into crit damage, or just improving the overall power of your gun, improving your reload speed, all that stuff. If you want to go down just a purely gun route, you can do all of that. And the fact that they did all of this with just a limited amount of different assets and different options for the character. It's actually kind of astounding how customizable your character can be. There's rings that you can equip to your character that you'll find out in the world, and different necklaces and whatnot that you can put on your character that will also greatly change how the character plays, because the buffs that the game gives you for some of these items are actually meaty. They make a difference. Unlike a lot of games where it's like, oh, you've got +5 damage here, and it's really kind of pointless. If you invest enough points into your different skills, you will be getting major bonuses, and it will drastically change how your character feels and plays. There's also another very unique decision that the game presents to you that most games just simply wouldn't do. You have this thing called a Dragon Heart, which is basically how you heal yourself during battle. It's if you want to equate it to Dark Souls, it would basically be your Estus Flax. Now, there's an item that you can find out in the world randomly. They're not in every level, but you'll find them about, I believe you'll find one in every biome if you search hard enough. And they're very valuable because you can use that item to increase the amount of charges for the Dragonheart. Basically, how many times you can heal your character. And obviously, you're going to want to be able to have as many of those charges as you can possibly get, right? However, this same item is also required to max out your gear. So it's a balancing act of how many health charges you actually want to have based on how much gear you want to have maxed out. Most games would have two separate items and you could go about that either way, but it does present you with a very interesting decision. So when I was playing, for example, I played a lot with two of my friends. One of them had an insane amount of health charges. Basically, he could just heal all day. I should also say, you use those same healing charges to revive your teammates in battle too. So that is all. If you're someone who's playing with a group, you also got to keep that in mind. If you want to be reviving people a lot, you're also going to have to use this same item to heal people with as well. Another one of my buddies said, I don't need that many health charges, and he just went about maxing out as many weapons as he possibly could. But it's just another interesting design decision that the game made. Another reason why I like this game so much. It's just you can do what you want to do with your characters, which you wouldn't expect in really a simple game that this is. Now, like I said, at any given point, you can reset the world and basically start over in a new game plus. You won't lose your weapons or your items or any of your upgrades. You will lose key items, but you won't lose any of your healing items or any stuff like that. You'll keep all your skills. You'll keep all your level. Everything else will just re-roll and reset, and you'll have a whole new fresh set of enemies and bosses to go through, and maybe some different items to find. One of the best things that this game does is its replay value. I can't stress that enough. There's so many games that you play where you go through it and you're like, that was pretty fun, but I'll probably never pick this game up again. This game is set up and designed where you can play it through once if you want, but you can also grind it out for potentially hundreds of hours just on one character before you could even max them out. You don't have to do that. You can absolutely beat the game with a lower level character. The game isn't the hardest game I've ever played, but it is a pretty stiff challenge. Some of the bosses can be legitimately very tough to beat. Now, I wouldn't say that I was smashing my head into the wall trying to beat them, but some of them are a legitimate tough challenge, and you'll have to think on your feet. One of the great things that I like about this game is you can't just sit still and blast from behind cover. You're constantly having to move. The enemies will flank you. They will charge you. You are always going to be under intense pressure. You're going to have to be moving at all times. It's always frenetic. It's one of the great things that the game does is the minute-to-minute gameplay is just very solid. I haven't even really gotten into this yet. The gunplay, the guns feel great. Your character moves well. They walk a little bit slowly, but they can run fast enough. They can do slide moves into cover and whatnot, all of that. But the most important thing is how the guns feel. They feel weighty. They have good kick. You feel good firing them, which I would say actually for a third-person shooter, it's actually some of the best shooting mechanics that I've played. So the gameplay feels good. I like the way you can build your character. I like the way the world is set up and designed. I like the progression system and all that. Let's get into some of the problems that you have with the game. First off, one of the most glaring things. The story it's coherent, I guess. I mean, it makes sense. But the lore is much more interesting than the actual story. The story in the game is not very good. The end of the game, is actually just kind of downright silly, I'll be honest. And the cutscenes themselves are very, very low quality. Probably the worst cutscene quality that I have seen in a long time. Lots of frame rate issues. The animation is not done very well. It's just kind of a mess from that standpoint. However, everything else in the game, the way the worlds are presented, everything else is pretty solid as far as that goes. It's just mainly, if you're playing this game for story, it's not there. Also, there could be a little bit more to explore out in the world. It is kind of mindless at certain points. You're basically just blasting enemies, blasting enemies, blasting enemies, and going around and collecting scrap. That's really all you're out to do. Now, there are upgrade items you can find in every level. There's something called a Tome of Knowledge. If you find one of those, you get an instant upgrade point, which is very valuable. So it does lead you to want to explore. And you do need the scrap. You will run low on scrap if you're not exploring. So if you're someone who doesn't want to explore and look for every nook and cranny, for every little last piece of scrap to upgrade your character, this might not be a game that you would enjoy all that much, because it's going to take you a lot longer to upgrade your character and make your character powerful enough to take on some of the later enemies. However, I actually got to say, Remnant is kind of a pretty viable alternative to people who maybe get hooked on looter shooters, because this game, while it does have some of those elements where you're just kind of mindlessly blasting enemies, at the same time, it doesn't have a bunch of timers. You don't feel like you're on a treadmill. You can put the game down at any time and not feel like you're missing out on something. Yet it still does provide you with that. You can just have fun with your friends, just mindlessly going through the game. You don't have to worry about, oh, I didn't get this drop. Oh, no, I don't have this particular thing. It's not a game that's like that. I think if you enjoy the camaraderie and playing with other people of looter shooters and just sort of mindlessly going through and collecting stuff, you can absolutely have fun with this game without all of the headache and the pressure and the time sensitivity that some of these MMORPGs try to jam down your throat. So as far as, you know, being a live service game, I also said earlier, you can play this game entirely offline and still have fun playing it, because the gameplay mechanics and the customization and the upgrades are worthwhile, and it feels interesting and compelling to play at all times. And playing solo can be a very tough challenge. Some of these bosses can be very difficult to take out solo. However, some of them are more difficult to take out with a group. I can say that as well, because they'll add more adds to the game. Real quickly, let's talk about the bosses, because this is one of the problems that people have complained about, is that the bosses feel a little bit too samey. And I will say, yes and no to that. The reason why people say that is every boss fight, for the most part, has the main boss that will come after you, but every fight also has adds that will mob you. And the problem is because the way the game is set up, you're constantly going to be running low on ammo for either your handgun or your long gun or both. So the adds are the only way that the game allows you to get ammo drops. I don't know why they didn't just have like ammo interspersed throughout the boss arenas, but they decided not to do that. So every fight, for the most part, aside from one or two near the end of the game, are going to have a lot of ads coming after you all the time. And that's one of the problems that people have. However, I will say, if you just take each boss and the designs that they have, they're actually very unique for the most part. All of the arenas outside of the first couple areas are kind of unique. The mechanics of the fights are all unique. I think they actually did a good job with the bosses. Unfortunately, I think because the fact that every boss fight has all the mobs running after you, that people started to complain about that. And it does make sense. It does kind of get annoying. Some of the fights can be super annoying. Some of the exploding enemies, those can really kind of get annoying if you get kind of stun locked in place, and that can be a problem, especially if you're playing alone. But like I said, the game offers enough different mods and different options as far as customizing your character, where if you're having trouble playing solo, you could be better off using the decoy mod, so that way your character can just basically have another thing to draw the aggro off of. If you're playing in a group, you probably want to maybe have a healer with you, or someone who can use some AoE attacks, stuff like that, people who can mark enemies, like I said, there's all sorts of different options in the game. It's one of my favorite aspects of it. Now, I do have to start talking about some of the bugs and the issues that the game has. First off, audio bugs. Audio bugs in this game are constant. While the sound design is pretty solid, you will a lot of times still to this day, I'm getting a lot of audio bug drops with the gunfire, which is really annoying. It requires you basically to exit the game and turn it back on before it will pop back on a lot of times. And this is a problem that I've had even after a couple of patches. The issues are, if you start running into an issue where something's going wrong with the game, you can't just like hope it corrects itself, because it won't. You have to always exit the game and come back in before it'll fix itself. Now, some of you may remember a few months back I made a video talking about a broken patch that was corrupting saves. This came out really early on. I was only about 5 or 6 hours into the game at that point, and my file save got basically entirely corrupted. I lost all of my progress. Now, I didn't lose my character or my upgrades, but I lost my spot in the world. It basically re-rolled the game for me, and I lost all of that progress. So it wasn't a huge deal. I was only 5 hours into the game, so it wasn't a massive deal at that time. However, even up until a couple of weeks back, I'm still getting messages and posts on that video from people saying that they're playing on Xbox or PlayStation and still having similar issues. There still seems to be some problem with people getting corrupted save files with this game. It's something that I have to bring up because corrupted saves is one of the most important problems that you can possibly have when it comes to bugs in the game. If you're having a corrupted save issue, that is a absolute major issue. It's one of the problems I had with Days Gone. You might remember when I did that review back earlier in the year. Right after I got the Platinum Trophy to pop, all of my saves corrupted, and I basically do not have a Days Gone save file there, even though I'm someone who keeps multiple saves running at any given time. That I lost all those files because they just all got corrupted. So when I see a problem as severe as corrupted save files, I feel like it has to be part of my review. It has to get brought up because I don't know if you are someone who's willing to deal with potentially losing all your progress. I will say this though, overall, I did have a ton of fun playing this game. It's one of my sleeper hits of last year. I hope to see a sequel for this game down the road with maybe a little bit bigger budget. Like I said, Gunfire Games, they're not the biggest developers in the world. Darksiders is a pretty big franchise. This does not have the budget or the time put into it as a Darksiders game, I will say that. However, I think maybe if they stick with this IP, this is a fun game to play. I still have some friends on my friends list that still play this game now, even months later. It is a fun game to play, despite all the technical issues, despite the fact that the story is really just kind of nonsense. Mechanically speaking, customization-wise, everything else like that, it is very, very solid. And I'm someone who, most of the time, with most games, gameplay comes first for me, and this game actually, I think, nailed the gunplay. And I also love character building in games. And this game allowed me to do that to my heart's content as well. Anyway, that's it from me, Coach Toolshed. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Please subscribe. If you want to stay in tune with the channel, head forward. And as always, keep it turned to 11.